In certain relationships, your simple decision to step back is enough to provoke a psychological earthquake in others. There was no betrayal, no screams, no dramatic exit. You simply chose your own peace, and yet they collapse as if you've committed an act of violence against their very existence. If you have ever been accused of abandonment for simply wanting space, if you've been called selfish for choosing your mental health, if you've been labeled cruel for refusing to remain small, this video is your mirror. This disproportionate reaction has an explanation, and it is not rational. It is psychic. What's really happening operates at a level most psychology content never explores, in the shadowy realm where unconscious needs collide with conscious boundaries. The expert Revelation Foundation, Carl Jung, understood something that modern psychology is only now catching up to. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But Jung's insight goes deeper than simple projection. When you walk away, you're not just removing yourself, you're removing their psychological scaffolding. Melanie Klein discovered that our earliest relationships create internal blueprints she called internal objects, psychological representations of caregivers that become the templates for all future relationships. When someone reacts with disproportionate intensity to your departure, Klein's framework reveals they're not just losing you, they're losing a crucial piece of their internal architecture. Donald Winnicott identified a hidden psychological split he termed the false self, a protective adaptation children develop when their authentic expressions are consistently rejected. Winnicott's revolutionary insight was that some people never develop a stable sense of who they are without external validation. Your walking away threatens their very sense of existence. Peter Fonagy's groundbreaking work on mentalization theory shows us that some individuals never develop the capacity to understand that other people have separate minds, separate needs, separate realities. When you choose yourself, you're shattering their psychological fusion fantasy. Layer 1, the hidden mechanism, Klein's internal object relations. Here's what's really happening at the unconscious level when you step back from someone who reacts with intensity. You're triggering what Klein called the depressive position, a developmental stage where the child must confront that the same person who provides comfort can also cause pain. Many adults never successfully navigate this position. They remain trapped in what Klein termed splitting, the primitive defense where people are either all good or all bad. You cannot be both someone who loves them and someone who chooses boundaries. In their psychological world, your self-care becomes abandonment. Your boundaries become betrayal. This is why you feel that familiar knot in your stomach when they accuse you of not caring. You are not imagining this. There's a neurobiological reason it feels so extreme. Their nervous system is literally responding as if you're threatening their survival, because in their internal world, you are. But this mechanism becomes more complex when we consider the developmental origins of this pattern. Layer 2, the developmental origin, Winnicott's false self-construction. Winnicott's research reveals that children who grow up in environments where their authentic expressions consistently trigger parental distress learn to construct what he called a false self, a carefully curated version designed to maintain connection at all costs. If you've ever felt like you're performing a version of yourself to keep others comfortable, you understand this split. But here's what most people don't realize. When you stop performing, when you choose authenticity over accommodation, you're not just changing your behavior. You're threatening their entire relational blueprint. The person who reacts intensely to your boundaries likely never developed what Winnicott called a true self, an authentic core that exists independently of external validation. Your self-care exposes their psychological dependency, and their reaction is an unconscious attempt to pull you back into the fusion they mistake for love. This developmental pattern sets up what researchers call enmeshed attachment, a relational style where boundaries feel like abandonment and autonomy feels like betrayal. Layer 3, the relational pattern, Kernberg's borderline organization. Otto Kernberg's groundbreaking research on personality organization reveals that some individuals operate from what he termed borderline organization, not necessarily the disorder, but an underlying psychological structure characterized by identity diffusion, primitive defenses, and an inability to integrate contradictory aspects of relationships. When you walk away from someone operating from this structure, you're triggering what Kernberg identified as splitting in projective identification. They cannot hold the reality that you can love them and still choose boundaries. Instead, they project their own self-rejection onto you, experiencing your self-care as their abandonment. You're not imagining the intensity. There's a reason it feels so extreme. Their psychological world operates in absolutes. If you're not completely available, you're completely rejecting. If you're not sacrificing your needs, you're being selfish. If you're not managing their emotions, you're being cruel. Kernberg's framework explains why reasoning doesn't work, why explaining your position feels futile. You're dealing with a pre-rational psychological organization that experiences your autonomy as their annihilation. And this is where the most fascinating discovery comes in. Layer 4, the consciousness shift. Fonagy's mentalization theory. Peter Fonagy's revolutionary work on mentalization, the capacity to understand behavior in terms of underlying mental states, reveals why some people cannot comprehend your need for boundaries. They literally lack the developmental capacity to understand that your mind operates separately from theirs. Fonagy discovered that individuals with poor reflective functioning cannot mentalize. They cannot hold the reality that you have thoughts, feelings, and needs that exist independently of their experience. In their psychological world, your self-care is not about you, it's about them. This is why your explanations fall on deaf ears. You're speaking from a mentalized position, I need space to process my feelings, while they're hearing from a non-mentalized position. You're abandoning me because I'm unlovable. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. The intensity of their reaction isn't about your actions. It's about their inability to conceive of you as a separate person with legitimate needs. The paradigm shift section. What you thought was love was actually psychological colonization. What you thought was connection was actually enmeshment. What you thought was caring was actually codependency masquerading as intimacy. The reason their reaction feels so intense isn't because you're actually abandoning them. It's because you're refusing to function as their external nervous system. You're not being selfish. You're responding to a psychological dynamic that was never sustainable. The problem was never you. It was what you represented in their internal world. You became their transitional object. Winnicott's term for something that soothes anxiety and provides a sense of safety. When you step back, you're not just leaving a relationship. You're removing their primary coping mechanism. You're not cruel for choosing yourself. You're finally refusing to participate in a psychological arrangement that was slowly erasing your authentic self. The enhanced liberation permission. If you have ever been accused of selfishness for simply wanting to be free, if you've been called heartless for refusing to absorb others' anxiety, if you've been labeled abandoning for choosing your peace, listen carefully. The truth is that their extreme reaction reveals more about their psychological structure than it does about your character. That guilt you feel, it's not yours. It was manufactured by someone who cannot conceive of your separate existence. You have the right to disappoint people who need you to remain small. You have the right to prioritize your emotional well-being over others' comfort. You have the right to refuse to function as someone else's anxiety management system. This choice requires what I call psychological archaeology. The courage to excavate the buried parts of yourself that were sacrificed for others' stability. It requires the strength not just to leave, but to resist the emotional manipulation that will inevitably follow. Your freedom is not cruelty, it is a right. Your boundaries are not betrayal, they are necessary. Your self-care is not selfishness, it is survival. The resistance acknowledgement section. Many will turn back here. They'll feel that familiar guilt rising. They'll allow themselves to be captured by the pain of the other, mistaking their distress for evidence of their own cruelty. You might doubt yourself. You might wonder if you're being too harsh, too insensitive, too unforgiving. This doubt is not your intuition. It's your conditioning speaking, the voice of every person who benefited from your self-sacrifice. This choice requires not only strength to step away, but resilience not to return. Resilience to guilt, to manipulation, to emotional appeals designed to pull you back into psychological fusion. Most give up. They backtrack. They negotiate their autonomy for superficial peace, trading their authentic self for the temporary relief of others' approval. They mistake the other's calm for genuine resolution, not recognizing it as the temporary peace that comes from restored control. But if you've recognized yourself in these patterns, if you felt that tightness in your chest that says, "This is my story," then you're ready for a different choice. The Identity Declaration Engagement. If this psychological framework illuminated something for you, if you recognize the emotional archaeology that's been buried under years of accommodation, declare "I choose consciousness" in the comments. If you're ready to stop being anyone's emotional foundation, to stop sacrificing your authenticity for others' comfort, write "I choose to be whole." If you're done allowing others' inability to self-regulate to dictate your choices, declare "I choose my truth." This declaration is not for the world. It's for the part of you that still feels guilty for wanting freedom. It's for the aspect of yourself that was taught to mistake self-sacrifice for love, enmeshment for intimacy, psychological fusion for connection. Say this to yourself: I am not responsible for managing other people's emotional reality. I am not required to remain small so others feel secure. I am allowed to choose my peace even when others call it abandonment. The revolutionary reframes. When someone reacts with intensity to your boundaries, they're not showing you how much they love you. They're showing you how much they need you to function as their psychological life support system. When they accuse you of changing, they're not lamenting your growth. They're mourning the loss of your compliance. When they call you selfish, they're not identifying a character flaw. They're expressing their inability to conceive of you as a separate person with legitimate needs. When they say you don't care, they're not reflecting reality. They're revealing their belief that caring requires self-erasure. The ties that do not survive your truth were never love. They were contracts. Love celebrates your growth. Contracts require your stagnation. Love honors your boundaries. Contracts punish your autonomy. Love supports your authenticity. Contracts demand your performance. The neurobiological truth. Recent neuroscience research reveals that individuals with insecure attachment patterns literally have different brain activation when faced with separation. Their amygdala fires as if facing a life-threatening situation. Their nervous system cannot distinguish between temporary distance and permanent abandonment. This is why reasoning doesn't work. You're not dealing with conscious choice. You're dealing with neurobiological programming that interprets your self-care as their annihilation. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on neural integration shows that some individuals never develop the capacity to self-soothe, to regulate their emotions without external assistance. Your presence becomes their prefrontal cortex. Your attention becomes their dopamine. Your validation becomes their sense of self. When you walk away, you're not just ending a relationship. You're removing their primary source of neural regulation. Their reaction is not emotional manipulation, though it may function as such. It's neurobiological desperation. The guilt dissolution process. That guilt you feel when they react with pain, it's not evidence of your cruelty. It's evidence of your conditioning. You were trained to prioritize others' comfort over your own well-being, to mistake their distress for your responsibility. Healthy guilt serves a function. It alerts us when we've genuinely harmed someone. But the guilt you feel when choosing yourself, that's what psychologists call manufactured guilt, an emotional response created by someone who benefits from your self-sacrifice. Real love does not require you to sacrifice your mental health. Real connection does not demand your self-erasure. Real intimacy does not depend on your emotional imprisonment. The guilt is not yours to carry. It belongs to the system that taught you to mistake self-abandonment for virtue, that convinced you your needs were less important than others' wants, that programmed you to believe your freedom was their abandonment. The permission statements. You didn't come into the world to function as anyone's emotional regulation system. You are not required to remain small so others feel large. You are allowed to choose your peace, even when others call it cruelty. You have the right to disappoint people who need you to remain small. You have the right to refuse relationships that require your self-erasure. You have the right to prioritize your emotional well-being over others' comfort. Your authentic self is not a negotiation. Your boundaries are not suggestions. Your needs are not secondary to others' wants. If someone cannot love you while you're choosing yourself, they never loved you. They loved their version of you, the diminished version that made them feel secure. The psychological archaeology. Walking away from someone who reacts with intensity to your boundaries is like conducting psychological archaeology on your own life. You begin to excavate the buried parts of yourself, the dreams you abandoned, the needs you minimized, the authentic expressions you suppressed. Layer by layer, you uncover the authentic self that was slowly erased through years of accommodation. You discover aspects of your personality that were sacrificed on the altar of others' comfort, pieces of your soul that were traded for temporary peace. This archaeological process is not comfortable. It requires grieving the years you spent performing instead of being, accommodating instead of authentically expressing, managing others' emotions instead of honoring your own. But beneath the layers of false self, beneath the accommodating personas and the self-sacrificing patterns, you find something remarkable. The person you were before you learned that love required self-abandonment. The relational operating system. Think of relationships as having operating systems, unconscious programs that determine how connection functions. Some people's relational operating system is based on mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and individual autonomy within connection, but others operate from what I call fusion-based programming, an operating system that cannot compute separateness, that experiences boundaries as bugs in the system, that interprets autonomy as a virus threatening the entire program. When you choose boundaries with someone operating from fusion-based programming, you're not just changing the relationship. You're threatening their entire relational operating system. Their intense reaction is like a computer crashing when faced with incompatible software. This is why change feels impossible, why conversations go in circles, why your reasonable requests are met with unreasonable responses. You're speaking different relational languages, operating from incompatible psychological systems. The emotional immune response. Just as your body's immune system attacks foreign substances to protect your physical health, some people's psychological system attacks autonomy to protect their emotional stability. Your boundaries trigger what I call an emotional immune response, an automatic rejection of anything that threatens their sense of psychological safety. But here's what most people don't understand. Their emotional immune response is not about you. It's about their inability to self-regulate, their lack of internal resources for managing distress, their dependence on external sources for emotional stability. When you stop functioning as their emotional immune system, when you refuse to absorb their anxiety and manage their distress, their psychological system goes into crisis mode. Their intense reaction is not about your actions. It's about their system attempting to restore the arrangement that kept them stable. The consciousness upgrade. Walking away from someone who cannot respect your autonomy is like upgrading your consciousness, moving from an operating system based on accommodation and self-sacrifice to one based on authenticity and healthy boundaries. This upgrade is not comfortable. Like any system update, there are glitches, moments of instability, periods where the old programming tries to reassert itself. You might feel guilty for choosing yourself, confused by your new capacity to say no, disoriented by your refusal to manage others' emotions. But with each boundary you maintain, with each moment you choose your truth over their comfort, you're installing new psychological software, programs based on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice, authenticity rather than accommodation, love rather than control, the liberation process. True liberation is not just walking away. It's walking away and staying away, even when they promise to change, even when they appeal to your compassion, even when they trigger your guilt through emotional manipulation. Liberation requires what I call boundary resilience, the ability to maintain your position even when others react with intensity, even when they make their distress your problem, even when they weaponize their pain against your peace. This resilience is not cruelty, it's self-preservation. It's the recognition that you cannot heal someone who experiences your health as their abandonment. You cannot help someone who requires your imprisonment for their freedom. The most loving thing you can do for someone who cannot respect your boundaries is to maintain them anyway. Not because it helps them, though it might, but because it saves you. The identity validation. If you've lived this experience, if you've felt the confusion of being called selfish for basic self-care, if you've been accused of not caring simply because you chose to care for yourself, you are not alone and you are not wrong. Your experience is valid. Your needs are legitimate. Your boundaries are necessary. Your choice to prioritize your mental health over others' comfort is not only acceptable, it's essential. The people who react with intensity to your autonomy are revealing their psychological structure, not commenting on your character. Their inability to support your growth says nothing about your worthiness and everything about their capacity. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotional reality. You are not required to sacrifice your authenticity for others' stability. You're allowed to choose relationships that celebrate your growth rather than punish your evolution. The circular resolution. Remember that opening scenario, your simple decision to step back provoking a psychological earthquake in someone else? Now you understand what Jung knew. Their reaction reveals not your cruelty, but their psychological organization. Not your lack of love, but their inability to love someone who won't remain small. When you walk away from someone who cannot respect your boundaries, you discover something profound. The relationship was never about mutual love. It was about psychological symbiosis masquerading as connection. Their intense reaction to your autonomy reveals they were never loving you. They were loving what you provided, what you absorbed, what you managed for them. You were not a person in their eyes, you were a function. The transformation happens not just in leaving, but in recognizing that anyone who reacts with intensity to your self-care was never truly seeing you. They were seeing their projection, their need, their fantasy of who you should be for them. The final liberation declaration. If you felt that tightness in your chest recognizing a story that is or was yours, if you've lived the confusion of being called selfish for basic self-care, if you're ready to stop sacrificing your authenticity for others' comfort, then write in the comments, "I choose to be whole." This declaration is not for the world to witness. It's for the part of you that still feels guilty for wanting freedom. It's a promise to yourself that you will no longer mistake self-abandonment for love, enmeshment for intimacy, psychological fusion for connection. Say this to yourself: I am allowed to disappoint people who need me to remain small. I am allowed to choose my peace, even when others call it abandonment. I am allowed to prioritize my emotional well-being over others' comfort. The people who belong in your life will celebrate your growth, not punish it. They will support your boundaries, not attack them. They will love your authentic self, not demand your performance. Walk away and you'll see who they really are. But more importantly, you'll remember who you really are. Beneath the accommodation, beneath the self-sacrifice, beneath the false self constructed to keep others comfortable. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for maintaining boundaries. You are not abandoning anyone by refusing to abandon yourself. The guilt will pass, the confusion will clear, and what remains will be the most precious gift you can give yourself: the freedom to be authentically, unapologetically, beautifully you. Your authentic self is not a negotiation. Your peace is not a luxury. Your freedom is not cruelty. It is, as Jung understood, simply the natural result of choosing consciousness over comfort, truth over approval, authenticity over accommodation. Choose yourself. The people who truly love you will understand. And those who don't, they were never loving you anyway. They were loving their version of you, the diminished version that made them feel secure. You deserve better. You deserve love that celebrates your growth, connection that honors your boundaries, relationships that support your authenticity. Walk away and discover not just who they really are, but who you've always been beneath the layers of accommodation and self-sacrifice. You are enough. You are worthy. You are free. Choose consciousness. Choose authenticity. Choose yourself. The world needs the real you, not the version that exists to manage others' emotions, but the authentic self that was buried under years of accommodation. It's time to come home to yourself.